Well, the RTA operating assistance and reform legislation was quite an accomplishment. And it becomes more apparent as to what an accomplishment it was when you compare it to the financial crisis of 1983. Back then, due to a shortfall in sales taxes, CTA was threatening to shut down. It did severely cut service and increased fares. Some of the suburban bus service actually was shut down. In 1982 and 83, the RTA increased commuter rail fares 100%. These actions obviously severely impacted ridership. There was also suburban distrust of the RTA, which was perceived as a shill for the CTA. RTA and CTA were blamed for mismanaging the system, which I actually think is an unfair opinion, having been at the CTA at that time. For the next 24 years, we wound up with a weakened RTA with vague authority to oversee and coordinate the three new agency operating structure, CTA, Metra, and PACE. However, in '83, we did obtain $75 million in new state funding, which has grown to $185 million today. In contrast, the 2008 legislative initiative provided us roughly $500 million in new operating assistance. It did so without devastating service cuts or fare increases. And it strengthened the RTA to provide the regional perspective to create a unified, well-coordinated transit system that all large, world-class metropolitan areas should have. We accomplished this despite, unlike in 1983, a dysfunctional situation in Springfield. How was this achieved? First, we knew we had to get our house in order. The RTA, in partnership with CTA, Metra, and PACE, did the first regional strategic plan since the 1980s. It included all county and local governments and sought input from thousands of organizations and people from every facet of the regional community. Second, we teamed with Illinois Auditor General Bill Holland, who under a legislative mandate did a performance audit of the four agencies. In combination, through the Moving Beyond Congestion strategic plan and Bill Holland's audit, we created a long-term plan to serve as the basis for our operating and capital funding requests to the legislature. We verified that our financial plight was real and beyond our control. We developed reforms needed to improve the transit system and to avoid devastating future financial situations. Third, and some people would say most importantly, Representative Julie Hamas, who with the blessing of Speaker Madigan and in partnership with Republican Sid Mathias and most of the House Mass Transit Committee members, undertook a year-long effort to overcome legislative leadership stalemate and created a policy-driven, bipartisan, comprehensive funding and reform bill. The bill was subsequently sponsored by Senators John Cullerton and Ricky Hendon in the Senate with the support of Emil Jones. It gained bipartisan support there as well. Thanks, Kirk Dillard. Under Julie and Sid's leadership, an open and inclusive process was conducted to better understand the system, its needs, and the ways to improve it. Fourth, the RTA, with the support of Resolute Consulting, which, by the way, just got a Golden Trumpet Award for their work that they did for the RTA, helped to coordinate a far-reaching public outreach campaign involving tens of thousands of individual riders, hundreds of community, business, labor, civic, and faith-based organizations who gave our supporters in the legislature the constituent endorsement they needed to vote for a tax increase for transit. Fifth, the man who, in his own words, made lemon into lemonade, Governor Rod Blagojevich. He did not support the tax increase and, in fact, vetoed it and improved the bill by giving us the Free Rides for Seniors program. Never mind that his mandatory veto allowed the tax increase to eventually go into effect. Thank you, Governor. 6, ultimately, we needed the threat of massive service cuts and fare increases to provide the catalyst for legislative action. Doomsday management was particularly well executed by Ron Huberman, who I think is doing a fantastic job at the CTA, and T.J. Ross at PACE. But those doomsdays created great uncertainty for our riders and hundreds of employees whose jobs were on the line. We apologize for that, and we thank them for their patience. Without any one of these factors, we would not have achieved the enormously comprehensive financial and reform solution that was enacted last January. Let's review the reforms in more detail. Without these reforms, Julie, Sid, John, and Ricky would not have created the legislative majorities we needed to pass the bill. The most critical action was the reform of CTA's pension and retiree health care plans. Chairman Reilly took this on as his passion. He and his legal team, Andrew Gruber, Jim Franzik, John Doerr, and financial team, primarily Joe Costello, supported the strong leadership action of Ron Huberman and Carol Brown at the CTA and Rick Harris and Darrell Jefferson, presidents of ATU, Locals 308 and 241, to create a pension and retiree health care reform proposal that put those programs on a path to financial stability. The other reforms were basically to create a new RTA, an RTA that now has the clear mandate to be a strong regional oversight, planning, and coordination agency. There's no debate over what the RTA is now charged to do. We must foster development and implement a strategic plan and vision for our region and support that effort with strong sub-regional and corridor planning with our county and municipal partners. We must tie the goals and objectives of the strategic plan to performance measures and standards. We must tie the goals and objectives of the plan to a new regional capital programming process. We must obtain financial information from the CTA, Metro, and PACE to develop an ongoing long-term projection of their financial situation and direct the action necessary to avoid future financial crises. We will annually evaluate the CTA, Metro, and PACE's budgets and programs to ensure that they comport to the strategic plan. Through this process, we hope to foster innovation in our system and firmly establish a world-class transit system. Let's talk about our strategic plan and its vision for the future. We are implementing the new legislation and updating our strategic plan. As Jim will explain, we are pressing for necessary capital funding. This will allow us to develop a world-class transit system through enhancements and expansions to meet our population and job growth for the region. It will be a system that is based on ease of use and innovation through the adoption of international best practices. A new RTA is emerging, one with strong regional perspective. It is an agency that we hope will no longer harbor city versus suburb or train versus bus. Rather, it will be an agency with a fair and balanced perspective of the entire region's mobility needs. Our Moving Beyond Congestion plan contains a vision that states we are seeking to establish a world-class public transit system that is convenient, affordable, reliable, and safe, and is the keystone of the region's growing business opportunities, thriving job market, clean air, and livable communities. But what does that vision mean to individuals? How are those words reflected in our daily lives and that of our 9 million regional neighbors? Our aim is to instill a belief in each resident that they can walk out their door and use public transit to easily reach any location in the region. Transit riders from great regions of the world live with that assumption. Places like New York, London, Tokyo, Hong Kong have the type of comprehensive systems that are integral to their entire regions. Their public transportation systems can move people both across town and across the region in an efficient and convenient manner. We do have a good system, but it is not a great system against which other metropolitan peers around the world aspire to be. In fact, as Jim Reilly will discuss, it is a system with a deteriorating infrastructure. We must make the investments to maintain and grow the system as cities throughout Asia and the European Union are to compete as global cities in the global marketplace. We must have resources required to enact our vision. With so much at stake and so many opportunities before us, we must maintain the wisdom and the will to invest. But the most important element of enacting our vision is responsibility. The RTA has sought and has been given the responsibility of managing our regional transit system. We will take that mandate on with all of our strength and effectively use the reform tools that we have been given. With that, I'd like to turn this over to Chairman Jim Reilly, who, while de jure he's a part-time chairman, de facto, He's one of the most full-time chairmen I've ever worked with. I like to say, for a guy who's making $25,000 a year, for us, he's actually being paid $1.50 an hour. Jim Reilly.
Steve would just like to get me out of the office a little more. Thank you very much, Steve, and thanks to all of you for giving us this opportunity to discuss the challenges and opportunities facing the RTA and the region. Certainly, passage of a bill ensuring adequate and stable funding for mass transit going forward and enacting the reforms necessary to bring the RTA and the three service boards into the 21st century was a major goal that Steve and I had when we came to the RTA in 2005. And passage of House Bill 656 was a remarkable achievement made possible by the support of you in this room and many others. I remember when we finally decided we had danced around the T word long enough and decided to hold a press conference at the RTA office announcing our specific funding proposal, including a sales tax increase, eat the T word. I remember saying to our friends at Resolute as they kind of pushed us out onto the stage, those of us who are about to die salute you. But we stuck to our guns, and one faction or another denounced first one part and then another part of our proposal, always saying they'd come up with something better, but never doing so. And ultimately, with the support and steadfast leadership of the representatives and senators that Steve introduced and mentioned, we ultimately prevailed. What was especially satisfying about House Bill 656 was that while the emphasis was always on the money, the bailout, as the media like to call it, it represents a major, well-crafted, and well-thought-out piece of public policy. Very rarely in a crisis situation does the system rise to the occasion as it did in this case. And very rarely do we actually solve a problem like that facing the CTA pension system as we did here, instead of just throwing money at it. Money and systemic reform were certainly goals, were not the only goals that Steve and I agreed on back in 2005. We were also determined to begin breaking down the silos in order to create a truly regional transit system and to demonstrate that leaders all across the region could overcome their differences and support a common program. While we still have a ways to go, I believe that with the cooperation of the three service boards, the support of the mayor, the suburban Cook County commissioners, the Collier County board chairs, and mayors all across the region, we've made significant progress on both fronts. Metra's new chair, Carol Doris, and Phil Pagano have worked cooperatively and tirelessly to maintain and improve the great product that Metra has had for some time. PACE's new chair, Rich Kwasniewski and T.J. Ross, were steadfast allies in our legislative battles and have undertaken the critical, perhaps thankless task of unifying ADA paratransit service throughout our region. Carol Brown and CTA's new president, Ron Huberman, were also vigorous allies in Springfield and are working closely with us as we seek to implement the reforms so recently passed. 3 years ago, we were four agencies that very seldom talked except at budget time. Today, we meet frequently at all levels and are hard at work in a series of task forces to solve regional problems. Of course, more must be done, and we always need to keep in mind that our job is not just to build our own agency, but to create a unified, interconnected transit system that serves the need of all of our region. In terms of demonstrating the ability of regional leadership to agree on and support a regional program, I remember saying on a very warm day in Union Station as we launched our Moving Beyond Congestion campaign with the participation of political leaders all across the 6 counties, this time no war within the region, no more war. Sounded a little like an early Barack Obama speech, but despite all of that, many scoffed, but in fact, through 2.5 years of intense debate, that coalition of leaders stuck together and did indeed demonstrate that city, suburban, and Collier County leaders can unite and can solve regional problems. Now, of course, we must turn our attention to the unfinished business of a capital plan. Illinois First, the state's last capital plan, was passed in 1999, and the last transit dollars were expended in 2004. As a result, as we pursue a capital plan, we have to understand the tremendous backlog of maintenance we confront and our need to prudently expand the system to meet job and population growth in the suburbs, as well as changing traffic patterns. The Moving Beyond Congestion Strategic Plan, released in February of 2007, identified $10 billion of need that would have to be met with new state funding. We prioritized these dollars, and as you can see, over 75% was dedicated to return the current system to a state of good repair. Slow zones, breakdowns, and out-of-date stations are obvious signs of need. But just as critical is maintaining the tremendous progress Metra, for example, has made since the 1970s, when broken down trains and unreliable service were prevalent. Maintaining these gains and moving our system toward a state of good repair must be addressed before we expand the system. Let's just briefly review a few examples of the challenges we face. Here's a 1908 viaduct on the Purple Line. It's no longer able to support elevated track and was fitted with temporary supports by the CTA in 1995. The CTA Red Line viaducts were built in 1922. Pictured here is a 1995 CTA bus. The average mileage for the 400 buses of this series is 455,000 miles, 18 times around the Earth. And here is a before and after version of the Metra Great Lakes Station. This is the type of improvement we need to make all across the system. All three agencies have facilities that need upgrading. And PACE must obtain new, smaller, more efficient vehicles as they strive to serve a less dense but growing outer suburban population. As I mentioned, the case for investment in the more prominent elements of the system, such as trains, bridges, buses, and stations, is often very apparent. Nixon-era trains and buses can make the case for new funding all by themselves. But just as important to improving the system are the less prominent investments we must make in hidden infrastructure, like train yards and communications, electrical and signal systems that are well beyond their useful life and do not incorporate modern technology. We're not alone, fortunately, in our call for a new state capital funding plan. We've joined with the state AFL-CIO and the Illinois State Chamber of Commerce in the Transportation for Illinois Coalition in support of a comprehensive capital funding plan. In the midst of a difficult state fiscal situation and an even more challenging political environment, we've attempted to craft a capital plan that recognizes the financial challenges facing the state that still provides adequate funding. This proposal would allocate $6 billion in new state funds for transit over 5 years. Alternative capital plans have been put forth, but they're significantly smaller and do not address the needs we have identified. Perhaps the only thing worse than no state capital plan is a small or inadequate state capital plan. If legislators raise expectations among taxpayers that our roads, trains, buses, and schools will improve, yet do not provide enough funds to make the improvements, the public will quickly realize the truth. You just can't do capital planning on the cheap. And so while gaming revenues or leases of state assets can be important components of a capital plan, I believe we're kidding ourselves if we believe that an effective proposal can be developed without broad-based user fees or taxes. Now there's that word again. We used to think that was how we paid for a living in a civilized society. At least the first $3 billion of any transit capital program must be dedicated to maintaining and repairing the existing system. Unless there are significantly more dollars than that, funding for expansions available to Illinois from the federal government will be lost. What would that mean? Without additional funds, we will not be able to deal effectively with growing demand for transit. New expansion projects like Metra Star Line in the suburbs or CTA Circle Line or proposed extensions of the Union Pacific or the red, orange, and yellow lines will be delayed and, in my guess, lost altogether. By walking away from these federal dollars, we will severely handicap our congressional delegation going into the next round of competition. If we can't match the funds that the Congress gave us the last time, why on earth would they give us any more dollars in the future? Just on a personal note, I must say, as a citizen and as someone who's been involved in some of the largest public works projects in recent history in this area, I'm really disturbed by the incredibly timid nature of the current debate about capital. We say we're a world-class city, yet we in transit will be very lucky if we get enough money just to maintain what is basically a late 19th century and early 20th century system. A good system, but as Steve said, not a system that matches the needs of today. And the highway people will be very lucky to get enough money to really patch up what is really a 1950s and 1960s interstate highway system. While our competitors in Europe and Asia are well on their way to building a transportation network for the 21st century and beyond, creating that kind of 21st century transportation system, and in the process fundamentally changing the way we live, work, and play, would require a multi-decade commitment well beyond even the $10 billion called for in the Moving Beyond Congestion strategic plan, and yet we're presented with plans that are much, much less than that. That's not the Chicago, that's not the Illinois that I know, that I think I know. The founding fathers of this city didn't worry about the cost of reversing the Chicago River. They knew it had to be done if Chicago was going to move forward, so they said, just do it, and it was done. Civic leaders once in the late 1800s and then again in the early decades of the 20th century didn't worry too much about the cost of two world fairs. They knew that if Chicago was going to re-emphasize its position in the world, those things had to happen. So they said, just do it, and it was done. Corporate leaders at Sears, when they saw the need for a new office building to reflect Sears' stature, didn't stop at 50 stories. They wanted the world's tallest building, so they said, just do it, and it was done. When the mayor's father and Bill Stratton decided that we needed the world's largest exposition building to anchor the Chicago economy for the next several generations, they said, just do it, and it was done. Clearly, our mayor still has that kind of vision, that kind of will, that kind of courage with his efforts to land the Olympics, which has the potential to be the same kind of transformational event for our region as were some of these earlier heroic efforts. But the next few years will test whether the rest of us, our business and labor leaders, our civic leaders, our other political leaders, still have the kind of vision, the kind of will, the kind of courage that it takes to say, just do it. Despite the fact that we live in a state with a relatively low tax burden compared with other major industrial states, in a nation that has far and away the lowest tax burden of any major developed nation on earth, some will still say we can't afford to pay the cost. Our answer must be we cannot afford not to pay the cost. I'll turn it back to Steve in a minute, but first I urge you to contact your elected officials about the need for a capital plan. The new transit operating funding approved this last January cannot be used efficiently if we're forced to maintain outdated vehicles, old facilities, and obsolete systems. We'll continue to pay more to operate a less reliable system unless we have the courage to invest the funds needed to improve it, the courage to say, just do it. Thank you.
I promise you we will not go all the way to 1:30 as Ron did with his great speech recently. I don't want to upstage him in any way. As Jim demonstrated, we have extensive infrastructure needs and it will be a challenge to meet them. But we also face a challenge to transform our network into a world-class transit system. The RTA has to be more than a bureaucracy. It must be forward-thinking, a regional planning agency that ensures the financial and operational viability of the transit system while contributing to the quality of life for residents, their families, and their communities. I've reviewed some specific tactics previously in my remarks here, and we will use them to meet this new responsibility. But I want to close with some thoughts about the critical nature of transit to our economy, our environment, our quality of life, and how our progress toward a world-class system should be measured by both riders and non-riders. Transit improves quality of life. Comprehensive transit is the basis of vibrant, livable communities and provides the basis of new development. Transit fights congestion and gives all of us more of the vital resource, time. In this respect, both transit riders and non-riders benefit from a comprehensive transit system. Transit is one of the most effective ways to improve our environment and grow our economy. It cuts greenhouse gas emissions and harmful pollutants. In this era of $125 a barrel oil, transit can also save money and support our economy. You're right, it did get a laugh. The RTA system saves 276 million gallons of oil per year. It saves over $1 billion in gasoline costs for drivers. We are blessed to have a good transit system, but we must continue to improve it. Despite its deteriorating condition, it is one of the top systems in the nation. It is principally focused on serving the corridors into the urban core, but it must evolve with the emerging region and match and influence job patterns and population growth. New vehicle technologies need to be applied, including bus rapid transit lines, such as being considered at the CTA, with dedicated lanes and operating like rail. We need to use smaller vehicles, utilizing flexible routes and on-demand service. We need to improve connectivity across the system, such as through hub operations where rail, rapid transit, and bus lines come together. We must also integrate innovative technologies to help riders navigate the system more easily. We must provide more real-time information, more reliable service, and ease of connections. We must provide multiple ways to access information through information kiosks, your mobile phone, internet access such as the CTA bus tracker. And, this is one of Jim Reilly's favorites, we must work towards a universal fare card. We must extend innovation to the way we manage the system and its finances. We currently have public-private partnerships, but we must explore doing more where it makes sense. Such partnerships can provide creative financing through congestion pricing, which is also being done by the City of Chicago and the CTA, and innovative leasing arrangements. We must improve and expand our regional planning. It must be coordinated planning, of course with CTA, Metro, and PACE, but also with the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning as part of its 2040 Regional Comprehensive Plan and Development. And I forgot to say that Chairman Jerry Bennett and Executive Director Randy Blankenhorn are here, and they are very important partners of ours. We also have to work in this regard with our counties and local governments. With these partners, we must integrate general development and transit planning by providing incentives for transit-oriented development, by implementing TOD plans and private sector partnerships that can generate revenue for transit improvements. We must create communities that have transit at their core. We are very grateful for the strong support we have received from our riders, our taxpayers, our policymakers, and our legislators. Over the last 3 years, we have crafted a strategic plan, sought new sources for operating funds, and called for meaningful reform. Now we have to take the next step to transform our network. I echo Jim's call for you to reach out to elected officials and let them know the importance of investing in our collective future. Today, we have tried to lay out a vision of a world-class transit system for our region. We have to do more to identify the specifics, but if we apply good regional planning and coordination, it is a vision that is within our reach. Together, we can make it happen for our economy, our environment, and our quality of life. Thank you.
We have some questions. Now we have a lot more.
I've never seen so many questions at the City Club.
By the way, for those of you wanting, show them your hand.
Oh, I took it off.
You took it off. I asked him, could he do his famous Schlickman move, but he hurt his hand. You know, for those of you who remember that.
That's why you had to have the surgery.
I know that, but look what it got you. Okay, question number 1. What will it take for federal government to change its approach to funding both commuter and intercity rail in our country? Currently, there seems to be no national strategy connected to growing regional economies through rapid transit.
I would say with respect to commuter rail, we have a federal transit program that I think is approaching $9 billion a year or more. And actually, I think it supports us pretty well and has served transit very well over the last 10 years with a dramatic rise in funding over those years, which unfortunately the state hasn't kept pace with. I do think the federal government can be doing more for intercity rail. Intercity rail has all sorts of great arguments for it, and I do not understand why the federal government and this administration hasn't gotten behind it to the degree it needs to. But it has tremendous support in Congress. A new authorization bill was just introduced that we all need to get around and support. We also have a major transit and highway reauthorization bill coming up. Actually, funding's in jeopardy because the Highway Trust Fund is running out of money. We actually spent money at too fast of a rate in the past. That's why our funding was going up. But that's a good thing. And we're not spending enough at the federal level on infrastructure. There's all sorts of studies to say we are way behind the rest of the world in investing in our infrastructure. So I think the federal government can do more, and we're trying to make them do more.
Right. This is from Bob Manwith, City Club member. Based on your limited experience, can you project the actual annual cost of giving free rides to seniors like me?
Well, not yet. We don't have enough experience with the free rides program to accurately say how much it's going to cost us. We do know at a minimum it was going to cost us at least $15 million. We had a half-fare program for seniors. That cost us $15 million, so going to a free fare costs us another $15 million at least. What we can't predict is how many people out there did not know about our half-fare program and are now jumping in for the free fare program. And thanks to the governor and all the notoriety he gave it, we have a lot of people signing up for this free fare program. So what we estimated that conservatively it might cost us $30 million. We just doubled 15. But I don't think it'll cost that much.
This is from Joyce Saxon, City Club member. How will the recent fuel cost increases impact on your capital funding plan?
Well, directly they won't, but to the extent that fuel, that makes people take a second look at transit, to the extent that increases the use of transit. I answered this question at a press conference with some congressional people just about an hour ago who were talking about ways to promote transit, the use of transit. To the extent fuel costs drive people onto trains, we need more trains. To the extent fuel costs drive people onto buses, we need more buses. To the extent fuel costs drive people, particularly in some of the less populated outer suburbs, into van sharing and other kinds of things, we need the money to do that, and we need the ways to create the interconnections on these routes. So our capital needs just go up. It's a problem we'd like to have, but our capital needs just go up as fuel costs go up, as of course our operating costs go up.
Well, since we have the author in the audience, it's a good question. Will new funding from the state become tougher given the Civic Federation report? Nice planning, by the way. It really works out perfect. Go ahead. Don't fight over answering this one.
Jim, he's the politician.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, the Civic Federation just basically said what I think everybody knows. The state's in a very tough fiscal situation, and at some point somebody has to have the guts to fix it, and it hasn't happened yet. But traditionally, at least until now, it's been easier to pass capital than actual operating funding. I mean, traditionally, people liked passing capital because legislators could go back to their district with specific projects that they got. So far, that hasn't happened. I don't think it'll have much impact one way or the other. It simply emphasizes what any knowledgeable person, I think, already knows.
We have a couple of questions on this, and I'll just kind of combine them. It deals with Chicago becoming a world-class city with mass transit, and how will it impact us trying to get to 2016 Olympics?
Well, I got an easy answer for that one. We are involved in the Olympic planning. We've signed a confidentiality agreement, so I can't comment on that question.
I thought Reilly was the politician. Okay. Last question. How long until fair integration between Metra, PACE, and CTA? I know you guys tried to cover it, but my last question, so I got to answer it. Ask it. How long until fair integration between Metra, PACE, and the CTA?
Well, it's a goal we're moving toward, and as Steve said, it's been a pet project of mine. To some extent, technology and the business plan has caught up with us. 20 years ago, it would have been relatively easy, if not politically easy, to create a universal fare card. What's happened is that at least seemingly the coming thing are going to be privately issued cards, whether it's by MasterCard or Bank of America or whoever, privately issued cards, and it's going to be our job in transit. We may not 10, 15, 20 years from now have our own fare media at all. That's at least the sort of furthest out view. It would be we would of course have to provide what we don't have now, which is so-called open architecture machinery and software that could accept and credit to the proper service board whatever fare is due to them. That's what we're working on. It's a very complicated question. I was at our last board meeting. It was wonderful. It was almost miraculous. Only unfortunately, it's a smart card for the free fare for seniors. But we do now actually have a smart card that can be used by PACE, Metra, or the CTA for free fares for seniors. Now, all we have to do is expand that to the other 5 million people that we would like to carry.
How about a nice round of applause for both of them? As always, we give out metal or glass. City Club mugs, 1-year membership. You guys should probably have a complete section of this. Membership. And for those of you who like quiet lunches, next Monday, Tony Pareka will be here to speak. I certainly hope you come here, and this meeting is adjourned.